I just fundamentally disagree. I don't believe in closed models, right? I use them obviously, but I really think the best way of being transparent is publish what data was used to train your model and publish your weights, and we can all have a good look at it, and then we can tell you whether it's a good model or a bad model, and you can improve it. But if it's locked behind the door, then how do we know?
All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. I'm Tim Hwang, and welcome to Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOE brings together a crack team of the most brilliant and entertaining researchers, product leaders, and more to distill down and chart a path through the ever more complex landscape of artificial intelligence. Today, I'm joined by Chris Hay, Distinguished Engineer and CTO of Customer Transformation, Kate Soule, Director of Technical Product Management for Granite, and Aaron Baughman, IBM Fellow and Master Inventor. We have a packed episode today. We're going to talk about model transparency, AI scrapers, Wimbledon, but first I really want to talk about browsers. And I guess we'll start with our little round the horn question, a little bit of a personal question, if I can ask. And so let me know if this is too invasive. But Aaron, I'm curious about what web browser do you use on a daily basis?
Well, if I'm in a conversational mood, then I'll use, ChatGPT, right? So that's something that I enjoy. If I'm in a search kind of mode, then I'll use Chrome.
Cool. That's great. Chris, how about you?
I'm still on Netscape Navigator.
Old school. Very nice. I respect that. And Kate, what do you think?
I use Chrome on my laptop and I use Brave on my cell phone.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I'm a big Brave fan here too. The use of the phrase browser war is kind of funny in the AI context. I just want to give a little bit of history here. I was looking up a little bit before the show started. So browser war has been something that's been used as a term of art for competition in the technology space for decades now, right? The first browser war was Internet Explorer versus Netscape Navigator in the late 90s. Happened again in the 2000s between Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Chrome. And I think it's really interesting that we appear to be on the cusp of an entirely new browser war. So Perplexity, the AI search company, has launched a new AI-driven browser called Comet. And there also are rumors that OpenAI is working on one of these sort of AI-driven browsers as well. And so, Chris, maybe I'll start with you. I guess maybe the first thing I think would be good for our listeners to get an intuition is why are these cutting-edge technology companies working on a kind of software which is really old, right? Decades old at this point. Why is it important?
I mean, it's super important because that's the path to revenue. I would love to explain it in a different way, but whoever controls the pane of glass is controlling the revenue. So if we think about how we do search today, you go to Google, you're going to click on your browser bar. You don't even go to the website anymore, right? You type in your search, get your 10 blue links, and then you click through, right? And really, everybody wants to be the first place where you go for information, right? And it's great. Perplexity is an amazing site. It comes back with absolutely awesome stuff. ChatGPT is the same. But actually, there is a friction point, right? So when I do a search, I open up my browser or my phone or whatever, and I have to go to the site. And you know how I'm usually going to the site? I'm Googling Perplexity because I'm too lazy to do anything else, right? So I put it in the browser bar, I put the word Perplexity or ChatGPT, and then eventually I go click, and I go to the site. They don't want that experience. What they want is when you open up the browser, you are going directly to their pane of glass. And therefore, when you do the interactions and when you do the search, they are coming back with their search results. So this is all about control. This is all about ultimately, it's going to come back down to ads at some point and revenue. So obviously, Google's not going to be happy about this. And there's not a lot they're going to be able to do about it as well, because they can't go all, gunslinging or whatever phrase is, right, in that sense, because they've just had a whole you got to sell Chrome thing, right? So they can't suddenly go, yeah, we're going to get rid of you. So this is going to be interesting.
Aaron, I guess question for you. This is a little bit of I think, almost change of tactics. I don't know if you'd agree from the frontier AI model companies, or I guess Perplexity as well, right? Companies that are primarily kind of AI first. Because I think there's maybe a view that originally, why rebuild the browser, right? What we're going to do is just simply everybody's going to adopt chatbots. And so what used to be on search will just go over to chatbots, and that will be that. This seems like now the other way around, right? Which is they're saying, okay, well, we also have to launch in a browser form factor. And I guess, I mean, in response to your kind of answer to our round the horn question, it seems like right now you're kind of doing both. And I guess the question is whether or not you think over time they just converge on the same thing, right? Like there won't be any browsers anymore. It really will just be chatbots, everything. And what they're calling a browser is really just a chatbot.
Yeah, I mean, the AI first browser wars are here, right? I mean, it's great to watch and be a part of it. Instead of this internet search, we're now moving towards this conversational, and you can think of it like this context-aware discovery. And I saw this quote where these AI, first browsers, it's designed for curiosity and built for answers, right? Instead of just going and searching and trying to link all these data pieces together, and then we have to really do the work, right? And the stakes are just really high. Chris pointed out that really, all these different companies, frontier companies, and even established companies now they're now joisting for this default entry point to the web. And the web itself, internet, is changing. There's a lot of agentic protocols that are now coming out. So it's agent talking to agent, providing answers through conversations. And then what I like to do is this hybrid, kind of searching, where I have a traditional search browser that's then flanked off on the side by maybe a OpenAI or even a Perplexity kind of search capability there. And yes, I'm still waiting to get access to that Comet browser. So if anyone from Perplexity is listening, take me off that wait list, right? So I can get in there, right? And
No
and
pressure.
and
Yeah.
use it. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one dimension to this that I think is kind of interesting is particularly in browsers, it feels like that there has been this kind of long history of thinking about the browser as sort of like your privacy defender on the internet. You mentioned Brave. I'm a big Brave fan, right? For those who don't know, it's a project that was kind of an offshoot of Chrome, but the explicit purpose is how do we kind of use the browser as a way of kind of shielding your privacy online. I guess one question is like, should we be worried about kind of the entrance of these more AI companies into the space? Because it feels like the norm there hasn't been so strongly set, right? Like that it feels like part of the expectation with, say, ChatGPT is that they get all your transcripts, right? And so I don't know how you think that's going to evolve. Like in some ways, do you think part of this is like resetting the norms of, I think, all the good work that's been done around browsers, or will kind of the browser norms around privacy hold over time?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I completely agree. Ads and revenue is the primary driver here, but I think there's a really important driver here that OpenAI is pursuing on data collection. I feel like I say this every time that I'm on the show. It's all about more ways. Yeah, OpenAI can collect data, collect interesting, relevant data, and not have restrictions and terms from other browser providers limiting what they can track and what they can gather and use. So I completely agree. I think this is going to, open up new revenue opportunities, both from an ads perspective, but also from like continuing to improve the model and continuing to try and create differentiation in the models that are driving the value that's trying to attract the customers. So creating a nice little virtuous cycle for them. And I worry tremendously about the privacy risks. And as you said, I use Brave for the same exact reason because I'm fairly privacy conscious above, my online presence. And, I don't think the incentives are going to hold to maintain that level of privacy with these model providers creating their own browser platform.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, not to mention, I mean, ads have been at the kind of center of the discussion so far. Like, I think one of the things that's kind of nice about the existing generation of, like, say, chatbot tools is that it's like subscription. So I feel like I've got a little bit more trust in that than in a world where they are starting to monetize through ads. And that almost feels like it changes a lot of the deep kind of value prop, right? Of like why these technologies are really cool and exciting in the first place. Do you think there'll continue to be a market for a subscription, or is that kind of like a little bit like, or I mean, early in the day, you
Yeah.
used to be able to subscribe to a search engine very briefly as well. And so kind of the question is like whether or not like that holds as the primary business model.
I think we're going to continue to see subscription where there are specific terms around how your data is used, particularly for enterprise use cases, right? Companies are going to want to pay OpenAI and others to make sure that their sensitive data is, handled in a very specific way and format, that those terms do not necessarily apply to, the general web browser that any of us download and then start to use for OpenAI. So I don't think the subscription is going to go away. I think there's too much emphasis for enterprise use models on data stewardship, where they're going to monetize that in, subscription type format.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Chris, do you think that, I mean, one result of what Kate's saying is almost like increasing, like, kind of inequality online, right? Like, there'll be like the class of people who can afford to pay like $200 a month for the extra pro version, or who knows, $1,000 a month, right? I know is what OpenAI was quoting a little while back. And then there'll be everybody else who gets like the browser for free. And it'll be kind of a chatbot experience, but they'll monetize and there'll be ads and all that.
Oh, Tim, you're breaking my heart at the moment. You are
I'm sorry.
you are telling me my current predicament, right? The amount of money that goes out of my account to AI companies at the moment is
It's
incredible,
like
and I'm
rent, utilities, and, you know.
and luckily my wife doesn't watch this podcast, so she doesn't know. So, but no, I think there is kind of a two-class system at the moment because unfortunately it's not enough to have one subscription, right? You want to be able to go with the latest and greatest of all the models, and the reality is with the subscription, you get higher limits, you get access to the latest models. So it is very much a two-tier system. But then these models are hugely expensive to run, right? So you got to pay for it somehow. I would like to see a world where compute becomes ubiquitous and therefore and it's charged like kind of electricity in that sense, and it's kind of just a metered rate. I think that would be a good thing. I would like to see more of a grid system for compute, as opposed to sort of plugging into a wall like an electric charger. So I think that's kind of where I'd like to see, but I think we're well off of that. But this is why open source is so important, and why having compute on your laptop is so important, right? And why it's really important to get the smaller models as quick and as powerful as possible so that we can open that up and it's not reliant on those with the biggest GPU and those with the biggest compute. And I know that's rich considering the amount of money I spend on AI, but I really, really, really think that compute should be ubiquitous in this sense.
Yeah, that's right. If it was widely available, you would just use more, right? You'd be subscribing and also using all the open source models. All right, Aaron, final thought on this is, so in the original browser war, you had Internet Explorer versus Netscape Navigator. And in the second battle, you had Internet Explorer versus Firefox versus Chrome. And so I guess so far to this race, we've got Comet from Perplexity, OpenAI probably. Do you have any other predictions on who's going to jump in next on the great AI browser war?
Yeah, I mean, there's always Microsoft's Edge, and Copilot. There's the browser companies, Dia. There's Arc, right? I mean, there's many, companies that are gonna, jump in, and I mean, the winner of the AI browser wars, and there may not be a singular winner here. It might be a conglomeration or an aggregation, right, of these types of AI based browsers, but they will define how we access knowledge and how we do tasks and even think online, maybe even for the next decade. So it's going to be fascinating, right, to watch this.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it for sure. I'm going to move us on to our next topic. So, interesting post came out of Anthropic just recently, and it's entitled "The Need for Transparency in Frontier AI." And effectively, what Anthropic does is that they say, look, we're a frontier model company. We think it's important to be responsible in the space. And so what we're putting forwards is our proposal on what sort of regulation, in effect, should look like around frontier model transparency. And they list a long list of things that should be done, right? So they say, these transparency regimes should only apply to the largest model developers. People need to publish system cards. They need to make their secure development frameworks public. They need to protect whistleblowers. They need transparency standards, kind of a whole sort of regulatory stack that they kind of propose as kind of the framework here. And I guess, Kate, maybe I'll kick it over to you. I mean, I'll just play cynic for a moment, right? Which is, I don't know, I'm a big company that's one of the most valuable companies in the world. Why am I calling for regulation? Doesn't that just raise the costs of doing business? Like, why is that a thing that like Anthropic would be doing?
I mean, I think Anthropic has good motives and have always tried to err on the side of a conservative, responsible approach to AI. So that I don't think we could refute. But I do worry, and I'm all for transparency in AI. Let me just start there. I do worry the way that Anthropic has framed some of their suggestions with cutoffs and only frontier model providers and large language model providers kind of plays into this, story that Anthropic has perpetuated and, gotten some flack around, that only big model providers can build safe AI, and can only a few people, namely them, can do this responsibly. And, I think where they start to go maybe a little astray in these proposed requirements is that they really focus on, okay, we're going to make sure that the big model providers have to play transparently, but startups, smaller places, models where there isn't a lot of revenue attached to it, you don't have to worry. You can get exempt. That way, we're, allowing everyone to continue to innovate. And I think that's the wrong approach. If we talk about why we need transparency, it's to help people understand and manage risks. And risks are not just based off of the model, they're based off of the application. And so I don't care if this model was trained by a tiny startup or trained by Anthropic or trained by IBM. If it's being used for medical decision making, there's a set of risks and a framework that we should be transparent about, that everyone should be able to look at, understand, just like they inspect the label on any FDA approved drug or whatever the case may be. So, I think they are straying a little bit too close to the only big model providers can do this safely, responsibly. And I really think we should be having a conversation. How do you have transparency around risks that are application based, not provider based or model based, that type of thing?
I mean, I guess I am sympathetic a little bit to like the little guy here, I guess, right? Like if you're a startup and you're like, oh man, we want to deploy this AI technology, and there's all these regulations around safety and transparency, it does make it harder to operate. I guess you're kind of saying like maybe you should just, man up and do it. But like I'm kind of curious about like how you think about that. Because I think it's almost
Yeah.
coming from a place of like trying to like lower the burden. But I guess maybe you're kind of saying you're a little bit not too sympathetic
If
about
you're a
that.
startup playing in, medical diagnostic space where you're, making recommendations on patient care, I don't care if you're like a little startup. There should be basic requirements. We don't give free passes to companies, developing drugs just because they're new. They still have to go through the standard trials process to bring a drug to market. So, but that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of ways in areas for startups and other players that are smaller trying to get their foot to start building expertise and experience. Like if it's a tiny startup working in maybe retail or like a lower risk application, then, I don't think they should be subject to the same requirements and regulations. So I think it really has to have an application based approach to transparency requirements.
Yeah, super interesting. Chris, what do you think about this? I mean, I think what I'm hearing from Kate is almost like kind of this proposal that, Anthropic's very much just like, look how big the model is. That's like kind of the relevant place where we draw the line. I guess here is almost kind of alternative, which is we almost should think about this in terms of like use case. That's actually where the rub is on some of this stuff.
I think if the only thing that is stopping you developing a chemical weapon is Claude's system prompt, I think we've got a lot more work to do in the industry. That would be my starting point. No, I mean a more serious point, right? For a second, I understand where it's come from, and I do think Anthropic, as Kate said, is one of the most responsible companies, and I think they've been very open in their papers, and they do a lot of work on safety, and they talk about it openly, and I think that's great. But I just fundamentally disagree. I don't believe in closed models, right? I use them obviously, but I really think the best way of being transparent is publish what data was used to train your model and publish your weights, and we can all have a good look at it, and then we can tell you whether it's a good model or a bad model, and you can improve it. But if it's locked behind the door, then how do we know? And it's like, if you were buying, I mean, to take your example, right? If I went into a store and said, can I have a soft drink in there? And it said, don't worry, you won't die from drinking this. Trust me, it's got secret ingredient X. You know
It's like
what I
weird
mean?
sales pitch.
I'd be like, maybe I'll buy the water over there instead. At least and I think you just gotta, I get the point about labeling, but I mean, come on, you know the problem with labeling, and you know what goes on in those areas. So I think it comes from a good place, but I think transparency ultimately comes from being more open, and therefore, if everybody is more open, I think we're going to get to this sort of issue of being able to understand how to fix all the bad problems with a wider set of eyes being able to look at that.
Aaron, if you'll let me play, I don't even know if this is Dario's position, but like if you let me play like devil's advocate for a second, I think a company like Anthropic might say, well, the problem with what Chris is proposing is it would just give all of these dangerous capabilities to all sorts of people. And that's even more dangerous than like what we're proposing. Do you buy that? Like kind of that actually there's these risks with openness on AI where theoretically we'd have more transparency, but it might not necessarily guarantee more safety.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very complex problem, right? Yeah, and so I don't think that there's a one shoe fits all solution here. And what one of my biggest issues that really made my skin crawl, right around this was this selective transparency, right, where we can create this unfair competitive barrier, and it seems counter to what I think, Perplexity here and Anthropic here is wanting to do. So I mean, what is a frontier model, right? I mean, sometimes a frontier model, it started by these startups, small companies. They're the ones that begin this. But on the other hand, there's a lot of loopholes here where we're limiting the application, right, to just the largest developers. Where if you have something like 100 million of revenue or 1 billion of annual capital expenditure to be liable, right, to follow these minimum standards. Uh, but frontier models, again, tend to come out of startups a lot of the times, not all the times, and then we're saying, okay, so the most powerful or these advanced AI technologies, have a loophole where they don't need to follow this, right? Only until a big company either acquires the model or, like OpenAI becomes a big enough company to have to, bow down and then follow this. I mean, it is very ambitious what they're proposing because this requires, I think, laws, right? So lots of legislation has to go through, right, to make this happen. There has to be a comprehensive list of evaluation methods, So, but again, it's a good start, right? And if you even look back, right, and in the past, um, what was it, July 2023, where OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and so forth, they formed this Frontier Model Forum, right, and we're still trying to get to these AI safety, protocols, right, and summits, and I think this Anthropic's release of this, right, really, helps to kind of push it forward. But let's just be careful about this selective transparency that I think might be inherent here and not be counter to what's actually happened, right, in the field.
I wonder though if we're like letting, perfect be the enemy of good here. Like, of course, open weights are more transparent. And I completely agree, Chris, is the way to develop responsible AI. But OpenAI is not going to just open up overnight. Anthropic, like these companies have far too much commercial value behind having their proprietary weights just all of a sudden put things in the open. So, I see what Anthropic doing here is maybe trying to create what is some near-term wins around making sure we have basic standards and transparency and a call to action. I think again they're approaching it a bit of the wrong way, and I agree with the selective transparency issue, Aaron. I think the transparency needs to be guided by the downstream risk, not by the some arbitrary definition of the size of the model or the revenue of the model provider, that type of thing. But, this is ultimately a good thing. It's better to have some transparency than no transparency, right? When it comes to frontier model providers.
But Kate, even if you don't open up the weights, and I'm a big fan of opening up the weights, if you say this is how we train the model and this is the data that we use from transparency, the reality is there's only a certain number of companies that are going to be able to take the amount of data and have the compute to be able to train that model in the place in that sense. And I'm sure they can get rid of some of the algorithms or whatever. But actually, ultimately, what goes into the model is important, right? Because the reality and again, I don't know what they're feeding the model, but if you've got 20,000 pages of how to make a chemical bomb going into the model, well, guess what? The model's going to learn is going to learn how to do that, right? So maybe we can have a discussion of what goes into the model in the first place. So, but at the moment, transparency wise, they're not being transparent about that. So, and I get it, model safety cards, and I guess lots of companies are not being transparent because they think that's their secret sauce. But if we want true transparency, it's tell us what went in.
Yeah, and so there are different degrees of transparency, right? And I don't think, at least at this point, they're saying we have defined what transparency means, or this is exactly what thou shalt do to be called transparent. There's a lot of great frameworks out there, like Stanford has a transparency index that they run for different model providers. And it could involve sharing the data. And I completely agree that's super important. That's why we share all of the data sources behind how we train Granite. And we're really open about what data goes into our models to better help enrich conversations around the model itself and performance and safety and all of those things. But there's also a lot of like real evaluations around safety, around bias, understanding the limitations of the model that I think are absent from the discussion. And even that is, a degree of transparency that is missing from some of the frontier models today that I think they're calling for, which seems like a reasonable place to start.
Yeah, just a real quick. Why don't you just chime in too? We've been talking about the organizations and the companies and so on and so forth that creating this technology. But I think some of the onus has to come on the consumers or the users, right? That whenever they decide to use a particular model, they need to agree and abide by certain terms and conditions. And if they don't, then some of these minimum standards here that are here, such as the guardrails, can detect and automatically flag somebody's usage, right, as nefarious maybe, right, and then do something about it, right. So I think it's on both sides. It's the producers and the consumers, right, of these tools, and perhaps Anthropic could take a view, right, on that. Right. And then I would also encourage Anthropic, again, that selective transparency and giving a loophole for the small companies might be a dangerous thing.
Okay, if we could end the segment maybe on just a really practical note, because I feel like you're really well positioned on this issue because you're in the trenches, you're in the arena on this. Like, how is Granite, I guess, thinking about transparency? How does it think about model cards? Kind of this whole set of issues. It's obviously a little bit different from the Anthropic setting, but I think people benefit a lot just from hearing about how the team is sort of thinking about through these issues.
Yeah, what I think Anthropic gets right is recognizing that safety is such an evolving field and really not well understood to the degree today. There's so much left to continue to work on that they're not trying to prescribe what safety is. They're just talking about transparency. And that's very much the approach we're taking with Granite. So trying to recognize that this field is evolving so quickly, the best way that we can arm our customers, arm our users, arm developers is to be as open as possible while maintaining responsible use of and stewardship of any data that we've curated and used for training. So we're, again, in terms of our high-level tenants, we have a very rigorous data governance and review process for all of the data that we curate, such that we are very open of every data set and source that's used to train Granite, and we share all of that in our technical papers. We also have a robust safety framework, but again, safety is something that is evolving. So I think all you can do at this point is just try and be as open as possible and share where there are known risks, where there are unknown risks that we're still working as a field to better understand and figure out how to measure, what mitigations are recommended, and everything else. That's one of the reasons why we also include tools like Granite Guardian alongside our Granite models to help better manage risks with AI model deployments, knowing that not everything can be baked at the most fundamental level into the model weights themselves. And then, trying to be open about how the model is distributed so that the community can use it, test it, kick the tires, give feedback, tell us how it's going, and also report issues. So all of our models are distributed openly under Apache 2 license on Hugging Face, in addition to making them available in our products. We have a security incident reporting program where you can report issues. We're actually about to start a white hat hacking program and bug bounty program for Granite, which I'm really excited about. So more to come there. And so really we're working with a lot of different partners that, we'll be sharing more about in the next couple of weeks around safety for Granite, trying to involve the community, not just on using Granite, but helping to report issues and make it better.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we'll have to get you back on the show when you do the white hat bounty. That'll be really, really cool. All right, I'm going to move us on to our next topic. Obviously, a lot to cover there, and we'll come back to that topic in the future. Interesting story popped up. Cloudflare, which is most known for being, at least at this point, I would say, a part of the core infrastructure for the internet. Largely started as a platform for managing spikes in traffic, and I think is widely known, I think, across the web as sort of the protection that a lot of websites use against, say, DDoS attacks. And there's a really super interesting thing that came out where Cloudflare recently said one of the problems we're noticing across a lot of the websites that we protect is the traffic and the load that's coming from AI scrapers going all across the web to bring down data for training purposes. And so what we are going to do is that we have a system for blocking these crawlers. And rather than having to have websites opt into it, we're going to start blocking those crawlers by default. And so this is a really big deal for a lot of the companies that have been relying on these crawlers to like acquire data for training or fine tuning purposes. And I think it has kind of sparked a big controversy over what the norms around data should look like, because I think Cloudflare now in turn is saying, well, now that we have all of these groups of websites and publishers that we are protecting, our ultimate mission may be to think a little bit about how we monetize, right? How do we basically ensure that both Cloudflare gets a benefit and also these websites get a benefit, and that these scrapers can't just sort of scrape the value, quote unquote, out of these websites without kind of the consent of the publishers. And so I guess, Aaron, maybe I'll kick it to you. I mean, simply stated, like, is this a good development for the web? Does it like solve the problem of AI scrapers once and for all?
Well, so I think this is a fascinating story, right? As it's evolving, speaking of evolving, the internet, right, is evolving. We just talked about the AI-based browsers. Well, I think we have AI-based internet, right? We have new protocols that are being created, like ACP, which the agent communication protocol, agent to agent. You have NCP, the model context protocol, right? So those set of protocols were creating this, to me, this new network, right, of agents, where we have and if you think about it, agents could become like the new websites, right? Where you go visit an agent, it on demand creates maybe a website or creates data that's available. And so traffic to agents now garners payment rather than traffic to websites that garners payment. So I think we're in that paradigm shift where we're moving towards, that. And so Cloudflare enforcing this permission-based model for the internet is sort of this struggle, right, between aiming to give content creators more control over the content, which to me, in the longer term, won't be as relevant per se, just because we're going towards this AI internet. But it could also be bad for how AI models are trained and use like this in context learning and access to these large data sets. And so I'm very excited to see, where this whole internet does go. We just need to be careful that we don't restrict it, right? And I do think perhaps a decentralized way, right? Where, for example, by using MCP, right, by using a tool that could pull data from your own private repository that isn't publicly available on the internet. Therefore, you control your own content as the content creator, and you could charge someone by visiting your agentic, piece. So, I think there's a balance here, right? And I think we'll quickly get to that kind of balance where we're going.
I mean, it feels a little bit like we might be seeing a tragedy of commons in in process. Like, I think like one of the reasons the internet was open was sort of the expectation that you wouldn't be like driving a semi truck through the front door. And I think maybe now, as kind of like agents and crawlers become more and more active, it's not as easy to maintain that openness, or as costless. It's not as costless to maintain that openness. And I guess, Kate, this is like in some ways a very natural response, but I feel like I have like a little bit of, I feel a little nostalgic about it, or a little sentimental about it, right? Because it's almost like an enclosure of the
Yeah,
web.
I
I don't know if you feel the same way.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of the promise of the internet and a lot of the value that I don't know that people quite realize how much value just the society as a whole has gotten from being able to crawl and keep snapshots of the internet for others to use beyond even just models. Like, look at how search has evolved. Like, we have now very detailed historical snapshots of the internet, which is basically snapshots of society going back a couple decades, thanks to crawling. And I do think it's this common resource that has this big opportunity for mass democratization of information that now, very aptly, you put it, tragedy of the commons, we're going to start to see erode. And I understand why, to your point. Like, there's a lot of, frankly, bad actors. Like, this should be a symbiotic ecosystem of mass sharing knowledge and building products off of that knowledge that make it more accessible, that all can benefit from it. But we get reports all the time of different model providers, for example, ignoring robots TXT, crawling information that is, pirated just so that they can use it for training. Like, there's all sorts of these like bad practices when you then compile it together and then also look at the fact that they're resulting in these incredibly, uh, commercially attractive opportunities that are very one-sided, that value is not being distributed, it makes a lot of sense why content creators are saying, okay, this is no longer, benefiting us as a whole. We need to start to put up some fences. And, I think it's a tricky position that we're in. I get why they're doing it. I think we, as a whole, as the industry, it's kind of abused this resource because there are these irresponsible actors. I'll put it that way. And so now we're going to start losing a very tremendously valuable resource that could do a lot of good if it were fully open. And I think the only way out of it is we need to get to a much healthier discourse between content providers, organizations like Common Crawl who are, helping create these repositories of the internet, and model providers, and figure out how we can get to a more responsible approach with more, distributed distribution of the benefits that are being gained from this information.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, I guess I'll admit to being, as part of the story, feeling like a little creeped out, right? Like in some sense, like Cloudflare is like, we're standing up for the little guy, we're standing up for the little publisher. But it also seems like if they kind of are able to accomplish their vision, they end up controlling large swaths of the internet as well, right? They get to decide who gets to scrape, how much money they get paid, all that kind of stuff. And I think probably someone like the CEO of Cloudflare would probably say something like, okay, well, what's your solution, smart guy? And I don't know. Should we be sort of creeped out by this development? Because I think on one hand, I think it's very easy, to cheer for what Cloudflare is trying to do. On the other hand, it also seems to lead us down to a path that might not also be all that great either.
I don't know. This is probably the bit that gets edited out. Anyway, it was a great segment, but it's not going to appear on the show.
But take the child. I think the easiest way to keep it in is to take the other side, right? Which is like, okay, well then, what's the alternative, right? Like, what's the big idea?
No, I think it's hard, right? Because the reality is, you need big players versus big players, right? So to have that level of protection. But I hope that this is a transient thing, if I'm honest, because I honestly think the internet as it stands today is designed for human being consumptions and for the browser. And I think they are not designed for AI. Back to Aaron's point, right? Protocols such as A2A, MCP, etc., is really about trying to understand what those protocols look like. And if we think about headless content, for example, most organizations are hosting their content in content management systems in a headless way. So they're not storing it as HTML. What they're doing is storing their content as structured data, and then they're mashing it together with a template and rendering it out into HTML. That is pretty, and you will have frameworks like React and all these other things in a way as well. But the reality is the source content is not stored out in that rendered format the browsers expect. So what I think is going to happen as we change through into the future is that we will start adaptively rendering our content to the types of bots, etc., that will be hitting at it. And therefore, we know it today that bots like Markdown, so maybe they're going to get Markdown in that case, and then maybe new formats which will be more appropriate for training will come. And therefore, at that point, in the same way as HTML was designed as a markup language with controls, then you're going to be able to start putting in things like saying, well, actually, if you want to be able to pay for that content for usage, please do this. So I think this is a transient thing, and I think there are probably better content protocols that will be designed and can be designed over time to deal with these problems. But just now is a bit of a free-for-all. I think it's great. Honestly, I will take the other position. I think it's great that Cloudflare is standing up for that, because actually it's something that companies that have genuine, content that is they've curated, they pay good money to create, etc. It's valuable content is being taken, and then they're not getting the monetization from that because they're not even getting the clicks coming through from Google, etc. anymore. So I sort of understand that you have to do that monetization, but the flipping of where suddenly the savior comes down and then padlocks my shop up and tells you who's allowed to come in and who's not, I'm kind of like, I don't know. You might have went a little far there, but I think it's done with good intention. But then, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. Kate, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of wild speculation just before we close out this segment. I think putting 2 and 2 together, It seems to me that we're about to get into this big clash where there's going to be these AI browsers that are going to basically try to negotiate deals to access content, from publishers online. At the same time, you'll have folks like Cloudflare, like trying to create like a shield for the publishers and saying, hey, and there's almost like a little bit of a race between who will control the browser and their access to content and like all of these kind of more interstitial applications like Cloudflare that are also trying to get a piece of this. Do you have any theory for like who wins in that race? It's like, I mean, we're at the very beginning of both, but it's kind of like, it's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a really dynamic period in the this next evolution of browser wars with all these different factors coming together. You know, I think if we look at like traditional platform battles, right? It's all going to be about who can create that value opportunity that attracts users that then creates that snowball effect where their content providers in order to get clicks need to then get on that browser, and then all of a sudden all the dominoes start to fall. So, I think there's going to be maybe some interesting like first mover advantages here if somebody can strike up a really good deal with OpenAI or someone else, Perplexity on their browsers for top content, and making their content accessible and importantly paired with real value creation from the agents or models that these companies are embedding behind the scenes. Whoever can kind of land some really killer use cases around both that content and the models working together that just make this, everyone just has to use it. It's too compelling. I think it's going to help then set the series of dominoes to start falling, so to speak.
It's very interesting. All right, I'm going to move us on to our last and final topic. Aaron, I hate typecasting you, but I feel like every time you're on, we always talk sports. But it is Wimbledon. You've been doing a bunch of stuff around Wimbledon. I think you've been there. What are you working on this year?
Yeah. So I mean, so first of all, very proud of our work and our team, right? Because we took on this grand challenge, right, of creating this real time and accurate. So it's a large scale system where fans could interact with. So it's core consumer facing, right? And this was all about creating, this experience for both speed and accuracy around, two main applied R&D projects that we had, which I'll get into in a minute. But I will say, the championship is going on now. So if you go on Wimbledon.com, you can go on the mobile app, but you can see our work, right now, and you can use what we call match chat, right, and then see our live likelihood to win estimations there. But what I'm most proud about, right, is how we came together, right, and created this match chat where we worked with Wimbledon really to reimagine what it means to follow the game or the match, and this is where we debuted it, match chat, just a few weeks ago, and it's this interactive, real-time, what we call AI assistant that's built on top of these agentic. We use LangGraph, so it's these graphs of agents that all work together to answer fans' questions, right? And it's really sophisticated what we did. I can go into the details, but I'll just mention that that there's many different edges, right, and nodes where all these agents could work together, and because it has to be real time, right, with this very large scale. Put in a lot of these threads where they had timeouts. So if it didn't respond within a certain amount of time, we would stop, and then we would go back into a different type of agent that could respond faster, right? And these agents would run in parallel, such that we would have this pole in the tent that could answer, within a reasonable amount of time, given all of the different types of questions that you could have, and so on. So that's that part. And now the other part that I'm very proud about is our live likelihood to win, where where as a match is progressing, right, we show this we tell the story of the match about who we think is going to win based upon many different factors. So we look at the performance of play, right? So it's real time, it's streaming in. So as someone hits the ball, we get that information, right? So how many aces, what kind of forehand, what kind of backhand, and so on. We look at the score. We have different decay boosters and factors that we put together. So we built this series of equations, right, that help the fans to understand what's happening, and it's all built predicated upon what's called our pre-match likelihood to win, which is an SVM series of models, right, as long as decision trees. So it's traditional predictive modeling, right? there that then gives us all of this. So it's pretty cool, as these are combined together.
One question I had for you on this is I think last year we were talking about this, and I think it's just great to check in, every time you come back, because I think this is kind of evolving, is part of what you and I think your team is working on is like sort of re-architecting or reimagining what the fan experience should be. Where you're a spectator watching a game, right? Like, what are the things that you expect? And a lot of these tools are like very different to, I mean, I guess the old school way you watch tennis, which is, I guess you like sit and then you like your head pivots back and forth and then like the game is over. Do you feel like fans are adopting these tools in a big way? Like, do you think like there's certain segments of fans that are more into it than others? Just kind of curious about like adoption.
Yeah. So we have a paper that was published ACM KDD out in Barcelona, right? And you can access it. It's actually open source paper. So if you just search for it, let's just say if you Google it, right, for example, you can find it and read about it. It's our. I mean, we've been doing this for about 5 years, right? And just got to put a plug in for our team. Won the IBM Corporate Award right around this work. But anyhow, our fans adopting this absolutely, right? Fans are not only adopting it, but they expect this type of work, which is both challenging, but it's also very fun and interesting, right? To innovate together. At the beginning, we were looking at a very broad fan base where let's not be a toy store for all, right? Let's selectively pick a couple of the personas that we want to focus in on and be very good at just that, right? And so that's where this AI commentary really started, right? Where we would go through the series of pipelines to create commentation and then put them into these AI video highlights, right? And it was very high level, so it was meant to be for the generalist. But now if we fast forward to today with this Match Chat, this you can ask virtually any kind of question that you would want, right? So we handle the extreme fan who wants to know in detail every single stat that's happening. Why is somebody supposed to win? What's the biggest factor? All the way down to somebody who wants to go eat a strawberry, right, right on site. So it's a whole gamut, and it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, that's great. Kate, I had a question for you. It feels like a lot of what Aaron's explaining is kind of like, I mean, one of the great things these models are good for is prediction. And of course, one of the great activities of any sports fan is prediction, right? It's like who's going to win, who's up, who's down. Is there kind of, I don't know if you think there's like a worry in your mind. I'd just be kind of curious about how you speculate about this. Is like, if our prediction gets really good, is it going to take a lot of the thrill out of sports? Like, we just know who's going to win before the game starts.
I think it just raises the stakes. Like, if we get better and better to predicting and then someone beats the expectation, that's like
Right.
even more
It'll be even
exciting,
more
right?
hype. Yeah.
Yeah, even more hype. I think it has interesting consequences on the gambling industry. That's probably a whole different episode. But I think, yeah, I think we're going to keep evolving. We've seen a lot of great examples throughout time, most recently now with Wimbledon, of how AI can augment our understanding of the game. And part of that is improving predictions. Part of that's just predicting small parts of the game, like where should you look? Like if you're not sure where the ball is about to go or the puck's about to go, like it can help guide you and better understand. And so I think there's also a lot of educational aspects that deal with prediction that aren't just like so-and-so has an X% chance of winning this match, and then there's a big upset.
Yeah. It's funny too, because we had noticed at times when players look at the predictions, they actually change their playing style. So it's the chicken or the egg, right? So we make a prediction, then a player changes their style. So
Great power, great responsibility right there. So, Chris, maybe I'll let you wrap us up. I just think about a conversation I had with a friend a number of years ago who was like, I've been getting into baseball recently. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You've never been into any sport before. And he was like, yeah, there's just like a lot of really good numbers and statistics. And this is like why I'm really excited about this sport now. And we've been talking a little bit like in Aaron's narrative about how this is like, how do we take tennis fans and enhance their experience using AI? I think the other thing that this sort of leaves me with is whether or not like it's going to work the other way. Like if you're really into AI, whether or not stuff like this will pull you into sports in a way that you haven't, and whether or not this actually opens up in some ways like new markets for sports spectating that maybe haven't existed before.
Yeah, I think so. I think fans get into lots of different sports for different reasons. And I think for some people, that's going to be data, right? And prediction. And some of it's going to be what the strategy is. So I think for people who are more technically oriented, I think it kind of opens up the game and allows you to see it in a different way. And I actually think that's really good for hardcore fans as well, right? To Kate's earlier point about where the ball going to go, etc. You start to think a little bit more, and so I think it's totally fascinating. I mean, I remember once I hate to say this, and I scraped all of the IPL cricket from India once, and I've only went to one game, but it was fascinating. So I pulled all of the data in there, and then I remembered the kind of the Malcolm Gladwell thing about about ages of what month school cutoffs and things like that, and how bigger people, etc. And then so I ran the data against the IPL cricketers from India at that point, and I found the exact same cutoffs, right? So their school year started in September, but pretty much if you were born in June, there was like nobody in June playing cricket in India, just nobody. But then you think, oh wow, okay, this is the kind of case there where the game is sort of solved in a sense. But the earlier that you were born, the bigger that you are, the more you win. But then like Sachin Tendulkar comes across and you look at his stats and when he was born, and it's just like blows everything out of the window, right? So now I know nothing about cricket. I'm sure lots of people are going to complain. But it found me, I got interested in it for a couple of weeks, right? Because I was interested in that stats and data. And again, when I think about things like football, stats and data is just such a big thing regarding that. So I just think it brings new dimensions to the game, and I think it's going to get more people interested in these games. And I think it will change the games as well, right? And start to bring elements to increase engagement. So I think it's a good thing.
Kate, Chris, Aaron, this is one of my favorite panels for MOE. So thank you all for coming back on the show. We'll have this exact panel on in the near future, I'm certain. Thanks for all you listeners. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast platforms everywhere. And we'll see you next week on Mixture of Experts.